What just happened in that courtroom has the internet spinning. Diddy and Shia LaBeouf were both present for what was meant to be a routine session, until it all went off the rails. Heated words, physical tension, and a moment that forced federal security to intervene. If you thought courtrooms were boring, this shocking meltdown will prove otherwise. It was a Monday morning unlike any other at the Stanley Moss Courthouse in downtown Los Angeles. The air was unusually charged with anticipation, the type that even seasoned legal clerks could feel in their bones. Two of the most polarizing figures in modern celebrity culture, Sean Diddy Combs and Shia LaBeouf, were both scheduled to appear before the court. Separately. Or at least, that's what the docket originally indicated. But sometime over the weekend, a last-minute change to courtroom assignments brought them into dangerously close proximity. By dawn, TMZ was already camped outside, snapping photos of black SUVs and issuing breathless live streams about the impending legal fireworks. The rumor mill spun at full speed. Some whispered of a long-standing grudge between the two men, something personal, dark, and off the books. Others suggested that the courtroom scheduling had been deliberate, a legal team's power play meant to unsettle. Diddy, who was facing a federal inquiry related to complex financial misconduct and NDAs tied to a growing number of witnesses, arrived just before 8 a.m. His motorcade pulled into the courthouse garage, shielded by tinted glass and a throng of suited bodyguards. There was no sign of emotion on his face as he walked inside, only a fixed glare behind designer sunglasses and an unreadable half-frown. His entourage moved in a diamond formation, silently ushering him through security. Shia LaBeouf's entrance, by contrast, was theatrical. He emerged from a lone town car with a cigarette dangling from his lips, dressed in a muted brown suit that looked like it belonged on a 1970s film set. With a copy of Franny and Zoe tucked under his arm and an expression of detached contempt, he walked through the media cluster alone. Flashes popped from every angle. "Shia, are you and Diddy really beefing?" one paparazzo shouted. Shia didn't break stride. He simply gave a long stare to the courthouse wall as if it had betrayed him. Inside, chaos simmered beneath the surface. Court staff shuffled nervously. The bailiff rechecked his notes. Two separate high-profile security teams, usually kept far apart, now had to coordinate in the same space. A whispered conversation between the court clerk and a federal marshal ended with both of them scanning the room like something, or someone, was about to snap. By 8:55 a.m., the public gallery was packed. Rows of reporters, legal observers, and carefully selected press corps filled the benches. Some were there to follow the legal proceedings. Most were there for the drama. Phones were confiscated at the entrance, but not before a few blurry shots of Diddy and Shia's near collision in the corridor hit Twitter. #Diddy vs Shia began trending before the judge even entered the room. Judge Meredith Hanley, a stern and sharp-witted veteran of celebrity cases, entered at precisely 9 a.m. and gave a long, sweeping glance at both sides of the courtroom. Her expression was a masterclass in restrained disapproval. She already knew this day would not go smoothly. "Let it be noted," she began, "that any disruptions in my courtroom today will be dealt with swiftly and without tolerance." The gavel came down hard. The court began with procedural formalities for Diddy's ongoing fraud case. Shia, attending a preliminary hearing for an unrelated civil defamation suit, sat in the back row of the opposing section. They weren't supposed to interact, legally or otherwise, but as soon as the judge turned her focus to Diddy's counsel, Shia's posture shifted. He leaned slightly forward in his chair, elbows on knees, eyes fixed on Diddy like a predator watching its prey. Courtroom sketch artists couldn't sketch fast enough. In the next 30 minutes, the energy in the room began to mutate. It was in the way Diddy whispered to his lawyer every time Shia adjusted his seat. It was in the way Shia let out soft, sardonic scoffs when Diddy's legal team used phrases like misrepresented contracts and unfounded claims. The air was tense. Silent, but not still. Rumors about the grudge began to feel more plausible with each passing second. Some sources later claimed it dated back to an alleged 2018 party in Bel Air, where both men were reportedly seen arguing about a mutual acquaintance who had since vanished from the industry. Others said Shia had turned down a business collaboration with Diddy in 2020 that ended in a heated voicemail exchange. None of it was confirmed. All of it fed the fire. At one point, a bailiff shifted toward the center aisle, clearly instructed to be ready in case things took a turn. Court security doubled up near the exit doors. The tension was no longer just detectable. It was visible. Then came the smallest of gestures that ignited everything. Diddy, cool as ever, turned his head slightly, not even directly facing Shia, and muttered something to his legal rep. Shia caught it. Whatever was said, It was just loud enough to break the atmosphere. A tiny twitch ran through Shia's cheek. His jaw clenched. He said nothing. But from that point forward, everyone in the room knew something was coming. You could see it in the way Shia didn't blink for a full 30 seconds. In the way Diddy adjusted his cuffs with deliberate indifference. The courtroom had become a psychological minefield. Judge Hanley called for a recess just before noon. It was a brief one. But it would be the last moment of calm that day. Because what would happen next, just minutes later in the hallway outside, would bring federal security to its feet, shake the internet to its core, and redefine what a celebrity courtroom clash could really look like. When the courtroom reconvened after the short recess, the energy had not cooled, it had condensed. More controlled, more deliberate, but no less volatile. Judge Hanley returned to the bench with a look that signaled she would tolerate no nonsense. What she was about to receive, however, was far more subtle, calculated, and incendiary. Shia LaBeouf's name was next on the docket. His appearance was connected to an ongoing civil defamation case stemming from a 2022 interview in which he allegedly made accusatory remarks about a major entertainment executive. What began as a tabloid mess had escalated into a legal war zone. LaBeouf, already infamous for his unpredictable courtroom behavior, had chosen to represent himself, at least partially. His legal advisor sat beside him, but it was Shia who insisted on giving his own statement. As he stood, the air shifted again. Gone was the scruffy rebel in the hallway. In his place stood a performer. A man with equal parts rage and poise. Dressed sharply but disheveled just enough to hint at internal chaos. The kind of presence that demanded you listen, not because you wanted to, but because you couldn't look away. "Your Honor," he began, his voice low and even, "I won't waste the court's time with excuses. I'm not here to deny my words. I'm here because the truth, apparently, needs its own defense." There was a pause. Just long enough for everyone in the courtroom to sit up a little straighter. "My entire life," he continued, "I've been told what to say and how to behave by men who wear masks for a living. This town breeds them, manipulative industry figures who profit off silence and shame." The words hung in the air like a slow-burning fuse. Diddy, seated just 2 rows ahead, turned slightly. Not enough to draw official attention, but enough for Shia to notice. Enough for every reporter in the room to raise an eyebrow. The court stenographer hesitated a beat before continuing to type. Shia didn't name names. He didn't have to. His pointed language and icy gaze made it clear he was speaking to someone, not just the court. "You can't sue away the damage when you built your empire on denial," Shia said, his voice sharpening. "You can't sit on a throne of NDAs and call it innocence." Murmurs swept across the gallery like a ripple in still water. A journalist from the Hollywood Times began scribbling furiously. Diddy leaned in to whisper something to his lawyer, who nodded with visible irritation. Judge Hanley struck her gavel once. "Order in the court." Shia continued without pause. "This case isn't about defamation. It's about control. It's about the powerful demanding silence from the broken." "Well, I don't do silence." Another whisper from Diddy. This time louder. Audible to those nearby. His attorney leaned in, trying to contain whatever was brewing. But it was too late. Shia had already caught it. He cocked his head toward Diddy with a faint smile, more wolf than man. "I see we've struck a chord," he said, not bothering to mask the sarcasm. Judge Hanley's gavel slammed again. "Mr. LaBeouf, this is not a stage. Watch your tone." Shia gave a slight nod, but the damage had been done. His words had landed like missiles, and the room now pulsed with latent hostility. Several courtroom sketch artists had stopped drawing and simply stared. Then came a sudden shift. Diddy whispered again, and this time, his attorney stood. "Your Honor," the attorney began, "if I may briefly request the opportunity to clarify the record. Certain statements made by Mr. LaBeouf could be interpreted as indirectly referring to my client, who is currently involved in a separate and unrelated legal matter." The judge narrowed her eyes. "This court is not entertaining cross-case speculation." "Understood," the attorney replied, "but we would like the record to reflect that my client has never been in any legal dispute with Mr. LaBeouf. Any implications otherwise are misleading and prejudicial." Shia didn't wait for permission to speak. He turned slightly, resting one elbow on the wooden rail. "You might want to check your inbox, counselor. Things change fast out here." The courtroom collectively inhaled. Diddy shifted in his seat, and for the first time, the composed mogul seemed visibly agitated. His posture stiffened, and he tilted his head back as if trying to restrain a response. His lawyer placed a hand on his forearm, subtle, calming. It didn't work. Judge Hamley rose from her seat. Enough, she said, voice firm but low. This is a court of law, not a tabloid stage. Both parties will refrain from commentary not directly related to their scheduled hearings. Any further disruption will result in penalties. Shia nodded, biting the inside of his cheek. Diddy said nothing, but his expression was now carved in stone. As Judge Hamley resumed formal proceedings, the atmosphere never fully reset. The court clerk fumbled with documents. Reporters whispered behind their hands. The gallery leaned in just a little more than they should have. There was no physical altercation. No screaming. Not yet. But every word had been a blade, and both men had drawn blood in their own way. As the judge called for a brief break in proceedings, Shia stood and straightened his jacket. He cast one final glance at Diddy, quiet, calculated, intense. Not a threat. Not quite. More like a promise. Diddy didn't look back. But the courtroom did. And by the time the bailiff escorted them towards separate exits, the air had grown even heavier. Courtroom security walked with hands just a little closer to their belts. One even tapped the comm unit on his shoulder, mumbling something that would later be confirmed as a precautionary request for backup. The legal drama had only just begun. But everyone in that building, judge, press, public, knew this wasn't going to be a case about documents and statutes. It was a collision of ego, history, and raw, untethered energy. And the real explosion was just around the corner. The courtroom was quieter now, but not calmer. It was the kind of silence that came before a summer storm. Controlled. Heavy. Pressurized. Diddy sat with his hands clasped in front of him, eyes locked on the wood grain of the defense table. His lawyer, renowned industry fixer Daryl Koenig, was already preparing his counterstrike. He knew the optics were fragile, especially after Shia's emotionally charged performance in front of a packed gallery. Judge Hamley returned to the bench, her robe flowing behind her like a black curtain. The recess had lasted barely 15 minutes, but in that time, security had doubled its presence around both entrances. 2 additional federal marshals stood within arm's reach of each defendant. The temperature in the room hadn't changed, but it felt warmer, like adrenaline had replaced oxygen. Mr. Koenig, Judge Hamley said flatly, you may proceed with your motion. Koenig stood slowly. He was tall and lean, with silver temples and a voice like dry silk. He approached the lectern with the calculated pace of a man used to controlling rooms larger than this one. Your Honor, he began, folding his hands together. While we understand the court's earlier directive, we believe Mr. LaBeouf's statements this morning directly and deliberately insinuated misconduct on my client's part. This, despite the fact that my client is neither named in Mr. LaBeouf's current case nor involved in any legal dispute with him. It was, in essence, a thinly veiled smear campaign masquerading as an opening statement. Shia, still seated at his table, leaned back and gave a slight laugh. Not loud. Just enough for it to register. Koenig didn't flinch. We therefore request that the court formally strike Mr. LaBeouf's opening statement from the record and instruct the press to disregard any interpretation that would falsely associate my client with his accusations. Judge Hamley lifted an eyebrow. You want me to issue an order to the press? Koenig clarified, a request for decorum, Your Honor. An acknowledgement that Mr. LaBeouf's remarks were theatrical and inflammatory, not evidentiary. Before the judge could respond, Shia stood, without being asked. Permission to speak, Your Honor. Hamley hesitated. This better be brief and on topic. Shia nodded. Mr. Koenig wants the record scrubbed clean of words he thinks were about his client. If they weren't directed at Mr. Combs, why is he so rattled? The gallery gasped as one. Even the court reporter blinked, fingers paused over her keys. Koenig turned sharply. Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of behavior I warned you about. Shia continued, his voice low and loaded. Maybe some people recognize themselves in what I said. That's not my fault. That's their conscience speaking. Diddy leaned forward suddenly, lips tight, whispering something sharp and short into Koenig's ear. The attorney didn't repeat it, but his shoulders stiffened. Across the room, a marshal shifted one step closer. Mr. LaBeouf, Judge Hamley said, voice rising like a drumbeat before a gavel, sit down and remain silent unless addressed by this court. That is your final warning. Shia did as told, but not before giving Diddy a long, slow look. Not a glare. Something colder. A warning of his own. Koenig, regaining composure, returned to his argument. This courtroom is not a stage for Mr. LaBeouf's vendettas. We're not here to litigate his feelings or hear soliloquies about the industry's moral compass. We are here to uphold legal procedure, to protect reputations, and in my client's case, to prevent guilt by insinuation.
Judge Hanley narrowed her eyes.
Mr. Koenig, I understand your concerns. But until Mr. LaBeouf explicitly names your client, I will not be striking statements from the record. If and when he crosses that line, this court will act accordingly.
Koenig inclined his head but didn't sit.
I do have one further request, Your Honor. That the court instruct both parties to refrain from indirect communication, gestures, mutterings, expressions designed to provoke. There have been multiple such instances already, and it is clear the tension between Mr. LaBeouf and Mr. Combs is not purely circumstantial. At that moment, Shia shifted again, this time noticeably. He stood without asking and raised a finger in the air. Your Honor, if I may. You may not, Judge Hanley snapped. Enough, Mr. LaBeouf. I will not allow this proceeding to unravel into chaos.
That would have been the end of it.
But Shia, pacing now, spoke anyway. Is it chaos, or is it just the truth making people uncomfortable?
The courtroom erupted. Reporters leaned over one another for quotes.
Gallery murmurs grew into a rising wave of voices. One marshal placed a hand on his holster, not drawing, just ready. Koenig shouted over the noise. This is a circus, Your Honor. A disgrace. Order. Judge Hanley roared, slamming her gavel.
Silence returned.
Violent, buzzing silence. Mr. LaBeouf, she said slowly, you are hereby issued an official warning for courtroom misconduct. Any further disruption and you will be held in contempt.
Shia stopped pacing. He breathed in. He exhaled. Then nodded.
Understood, Your Honor.
She turned to Koenig.
And Mr. Koenig, your client will also refrain from any more whispering, smirking, or visible reactions.
I've seen them.
The gallery has seen them. Do not test me again. Koenig nodded stiffly and returned to his seat. Diddy stared ahead, motionless, but the corner of his mouth twitched, just once. The court resumed with minor procedural matters, but the damage had been done. The tension wasn't just palpable now, it was crackling. Everyone in the room knew it was only a matter of time before the next eruption. Courtroom sketch artists captured Shia's restless body language. Diddy's cold stillness. The judge's visible frustration. These weren't legal proceedings anymore. This was a psychological chess match, one misstep away from combustion. Outside, phones buzzed as leaks started pouring in. One anonymous source texted a media outlet. Diddy and Shia almost came to blows. The tension is unreal. This isn't over. And they were right. Because just around the corner, literally, in the next hallway, the courtroom would give way to something far more primal. And security wouldn't be able to stop it. It was almost 3 p.m. when the courtroom lights began to feel harsher. The air felt thinner too, like it had been siphoned out little by the rising hostility. And yet, proceedings were technically still under control.
Barely.
Judge Hanley had resumed with a firm command over the room, but everyone knew the calm was artificial.
Temporary. Fragile.
The gallery, though silent, was electric with anticipation. Phones were locked away, but eyes were locked in. Every twitch, breath, glance between Diddy and Shia was studied like scripture. Two men, from two different worlds, locked in a courtroom that had suddenly become too small for their history. Courtroom sketch artist Deborah Kelso, who had covered everything from Michael Jackson's trial to Lindsay Lohan's downward spiral, later told Variety, "You could have drawn sparks between their eyes, and it wouldn't have been exaggeration."
The next moment that sparked headlines wasn't loud. It wasn't verbal. It was just a look. But that look nearly detonated the room.
Shia had been pacing in his seat again, bouncing his knee, clearly agitated from the previous round of legal blows. Diddy, on the other hand, sat stone still, exuding the kind of silence that's more threatening than noise. Then Shia suddenly stopped moving. He turned his full attention to Diddy and locked in a glare. Not subtle. Not accidental. Deliberate. Witnesses would later describe it as a stare with the weight of a decade behind it. Something personal. Something unsettled. It lasted a full 6 seconds. 6 seconds of uninterrupted tension. Then, lips barely parting, Shia said under his breath, but just loud enough for his side of the courtroom to hear, "Say it to my face."
No one in the gallery spoke.
But the tremor that rippled through them was unmistakable.
Diddy didn't respond with words. He didn't have to.
Instead, he slowly leaned toward his attorney and murmured something inaudible, again. But this time, it wasn't a whisper of defense. This time, it looked like a calculated strike.
Koenig didn't even write it down.
He just nodded once, eyes darting toward the judge. Shia clenched his jaw, clearly bracing for another provocation. He tapped his fingers once on the table, then dragged his hand down his face, an attempt to cool himself down.
It didn't work.
A federal marshal, previously standing near the gallery door, now subtly took 2 steps closer to the bench.
The move wasn't called out, but everyone noticed.
Judge Hanley, though focused on procedural notes, had felt the shift. "Mr. LaBeouf," she said without even looking up, "I suggest you keep your eyes on the court documents, not your co-defendant." The words co-defendant were technically incorrect, they were not being tried together. But in that moment, it made sense. The courtroom didn't feel like 2 separate cases anymore. It felt like a single, boiling point.
Shia didn't respond. He simply lowered his gaze to the table, but the rage didn't leave his posture. His shoulders were still tight. His breathing still measured. He was holding himself back with everything he had.
Then Diddy did something no one expected. He leaned back in his chair, stretched one arm slightly along the bench, and tilted his head in Shia's direction.
Calm. Collected. And then, very quietly, he mouthed something.
What he mouthed was debated for hours on Twitter later, but one courtroom observer swore he saw the phrase. "Still the same punk."
Shia froze.
Everyone around him felt it. Not saw it, felt it. The change was instant. His eyes narrowed, his neck twitched, and he shifted slightly in his seat as if preparing to stand. That's when the nearest marshal stepped fully into the aisle, hand hovering over his belt.
Judge Hanley looked up. "Recess," she said sharply. 5 minutes. Now. She didn't bang the gavel. She didn't raise her voice.
But her tone carried the unmistakable weight of someone who had just averted an explosion by a thread. The gallery exhaled.
Some audibly.
Koenig tapped Diddy on the arm and nodded toward the exit. Diddy didn't resist. He stood slowly, collected, and made his way toward the side hall with his legal team shielding him from press eyes that might be peering through the back windows. Shia remained seated for a few seconds longer, gripping the table edge. He looked down, blinked hard, and then finally stood. His attorney reached for his shoulder, but Shia shrugged it off. In the hallway, everything was about to erupt. But in that moment, what the press later dubbed the side-eye that broke the courtroom had become a defining image. Sketch artists captured it from multiple angles. One drawing even showed the marshal caught mid-step, inching forward like a lion tamer nearing a cage. Within minutes, social media flooded with anonymous leaks.
Shia glared like he was ready to lunge. Diddy just sat there smirking.
Court staffer, unnamed, via Reddit AMA. They weren't just throwing words anymore.
That look?
That was history talking. Journalist, deadline. By the time the recess ended, federal marshals had doubled again. Diddy and Shia were no longer allowed to re-enter from the same hallway. Their teams were physically separated and escorted through different corridors. The judge issued a quiet directive to limit their physical proximity going forward, even though no official order had been filed.
It wasn't court anymore. It was crisis management.
And despite the best efforts of the judge and staff, what happened next would blow past all protocols. Because in the recess hallway, without cameras, without microphones, without rules, 2 egos collided at full speed.
And this time?
Security wouldn't just have to watch. They'd have to act. There are moments when silence isn't peace, it's the space between grenades. That's what the courthouse hallway became as Diddy and Shia LaBeouf exited the courtroom from opposite doors, led by their respective security teams. The judges' chambers and clerk offices flanked the corridor like spectators of their own.
No cameras.
No court stenographers. Just high walls, low ceilings, and tension so thick it could choke. The hallway itself was narrow, sterile, fluorescent lit, meant for quiet passage, not confrontation. But the moment both men rounded the corner at the same time from opposite ends, every plan for controlled separation collapsed. Shia spotted Diddy first.
His shoulders squared instantly.
Diddy didn't slow his stride either.
2 forces converging. Neither blinked. Their entourages stiffened.
Legal representatives issued whispered warnings. A courthouse aide, eyes wide, stepped backward toward a nearby filing room and instinctively reached for the emergency call button recessed into the wall panel. Then it happened.
"Keep walking," Diddy muttered under his breath. But Shia heard it. He stopped. Planted his feet.
and said it loud enough for the entire hallway to freeze. "Say that again."
The words were razor-edged.
Diddy paused, 2 steps away now. His guards reached for his arms, but he shrugged them off. He looked directly at Shia and said, "You want this to get real? Let's go. Right now."
A pin could have detonated the building.
Shia surged forward, not a full lunge, but enough to trigger response. His voice rose, cutting through the hallway like a gunshot.
"You don't scare me, Sean. You never did.
All that money, all that flash, you're still just hiding."
Diddy stepped in.
They were nearly chest to chest now. "Don't test me, boy.
You play wounded. I build empires.
You think we're equals." A sharp gasp came from someone down the hall. One of the marshals moved fast, too fast. In the shuffle to get between the 2 men, a federal officer was knocked sideways, stumbling into a wall, weapon belt clanging. Another shouted, "Step back, now." That was enough to snap everyone into motion. Shia's lawyer gripped his arm, trying to pull him away, while Koenig raised both hands and yelled, "This is out of bounds. Get him out of here."
The aide slammed the panic button.
Red lights above the hallway pulsed immediately. Sirens didn't blare. This wasn't an evacuation alarm. This was a silent alert to every marshal in the building, incident in progress. Within seconds, 2 more armed officers appeared from around the corner, hands hovering near their tasers, not drawn, but ready. A voice thundered, "Both of you, hands visible, step back, and do it now." Diddy's team formed a protective wall in front of him, slowly backing him toward the south exit. Shia, breathing hard, jaw clenched, finally dropped his arms to his side, but didn't move until a marshal gently pushed him toward the opposite corridor.
The hallway wasn't just tense anymore. It was broken. Court staff inside the chambers had gathered at the doorway, stunned.
One bailiff reportedly whispered, "What the hell just happened?" Another replied, "History."
And it wasn't over.
As the 2 men were guided away, a voice, low but clear, floated down the hallway.
It was Shia. "This won't stay buried.
You know that, right?" Diddy didn't respond, but one of his security detail turned and shot back, "Careful who you threaten, LaBeouf." Both groups were now completely separated, escorted into different holding areas while the courthouse scrambled to contain the fallout. A meeting between senior court officials and Judge Hanley was convened on the spot. The consensus, a full investigation into the incident, immediate reinforcement of the security protocol, and a temporary restriction on both parties returning to court simultaneously.
That wasn't enough to stop the leaks.
Within 20 minutes, an anonymous source posted on a private legal blog, "Diddy and Shia just went nuclear in the hallway." Screaming, posturing, security physically intervened.
A marshal was nearly knocked over. This wasn't just tension. It was war.
Reddit threads exploded. Twitter ran wild with speculation. #Shia vs Diddy.
#courthouse clash.
#security had to step in. TikTok had blurry reenactments before the hour was up, complete with dramatic voiceovers and grainy recreations from AI avatars. The real footage, if it existed, was locked behind federal servers, but that didn't stop the speculation. News anchors used words like unprecedented, combustible, and historic. One CNN legal correspondent summed it up best. "In 20 years of covering celebrity cases, I've never seen anything quite like it. This wasn't just about the law anymore, it was about dominance. 2 egos with long shadows finally crossing paths where the rules are supposed to matter." Back inside the courthouse, staff were shaken but professional. The marshal who was knocked sideways declined medical attention, but filed an incident report that would later become the basis for multiple internal memos. Judge Hanley issued an immediate command. The next session would proceed with strict separation measures, including scheduled courtroom time slots, separate entrances, and no media presence during transit. But the reality was simple. This wasn't just a legal matter anymore. It had become theater. And as the building calmed and the lights dimmed again into routine, no one could shake the feeling that the worst hadn't happened yet.
It was still coming.
And the courtroom, built for law and logic, was about to become the center of something entirely different. The sun had long since shifted from the east-facing windows by the time court resumed. Late afternoon light slanted through the thick courthouse glass, casting narrow beams across the floor, golden, but cold. Yet the temperature inside the courtroom wasn't defined by sunlight. It was dictated by tension. And after what had happened in the hallway, the atmosphere was no longer tense.
It was radioactive.
Judge Meredith Hanley re-entered the room with clipped, decisive steps. Her face had changed, still composed, still judicial, but now lined with the subtle strain of someone forced to referee a war in a place built for reason. She didn't sit immediately. Instead, she surveyed the courtroom with narrowed eyes, her gaze resting longest on Diddy, then on Shia.
Both men had returned to their seats. Neither spoke. Neither moved much.
But they carried the weight of the hallway incident like shadows stitched to their backs. Diddy's security detail had increased.
2 marshals now stood just behind his bench, eyes scanning constantly.
Shia, meanwhile, had been instructed to remain seated throughout the session. No more pacing, no more spontaneous monologues. Judge Hanley finally lowered herself into her chair, but not before adjusting the microphone with a forceful twist. "This court has reviewed the report filed regarding the altercation during recess," she began, voice sharp enough to slice glass.
"Let me be absolutely clear. This is not a backlot. This is not a recording studio.
This is a federal courtroom, and any further outbursts, verbal or physical, will result in immediate removal and possible criminal contempt charges."
A flick of her eyes toward Shia, then toward Diddy.
"Mr. LaBeouf, Mr. Combs, this ends now."
Neither man responded, but their stillness screamed volumes.
The courtroom resumed with routine matters, but nothing about it felt routine. Shia's attorney quietly submitted a request for modified proceedings, possibly virtual representation for future hearings. Diddy's legal team filed a motion to place the hallway incident under a sealed transcript, citing potential media manipulation and ongoing reputational harm.
Koenig stood to speak.
"Your Honor, in light of the leak already circulating on multiple platforms, we ask the court to consider sealing not only the internal marshal's report but any courtroom surveillance footage that may exist. My client's image has been severely damaged by what are, at best, rumors and, at worst, intentional character assassinations." The judge nodded slowly. "Your request will be considered, Mr. Koenig. But let me remind this court, leaks do not originate from walls. They originate from people. And if I find out that any member of this courtroom has contributed to the spread of private proceedings, I will not hesitate to issue sanctions." Shia's lawyer stood as well, his voice even. "We have no objection to sealing the hallway incident report, Your Honor. Our client is committed to seeing this case through without further spectacle."
Shia raised an eyebrow at that, but he didn't say a word.
The judge sighed, tapping her pen once against the desk.
"Good.
Then let's continue." But while the motions and filings moved forward, the room wasn't focused on them. The legal minutiae, case numbers, witness scheduling, document reviews, played out like background noise.
What the room was truly watching was the aftermath.
The way Diddy didn't look at Shia, not once, even as the latter occasionally stole quick glances in his direction. The way both men sat like statues, yet seemed to emit enough emotional current to short-circuit the courthouse power grid. The judge's attempts to restore order were admirable. But the damage had already been done. Outside, the media had already broken the dam.
Leaks were everywhere.
Shouting, threats, and a near-physical altercation. Diddy and Shia brought chaos to the halls of justice today. TMZ breaking report. Sources confirm a federal marshal was nearly knocked over trying to intervene.
The Hollywood Reporter.
#Diddy Meltdown, #Shia confronts and #courthouse clash all trending as of 5:30 p.m. BuzzFeed. A grainy sketch of the side-eye incident had already gone viral. Artists had captioned it. "Look of the century and 2 titans, 1 glare." Back inside, Judge Hanley issued one final order for the day. In light of the instability today, this court is placing both Mr. LaBeouf and Mr. Combs under a modified courtroom conduct order. This includes mandatory separate entrances, staggered schedules, and limited courtroom access to authorized personnel only. Furthermore, any further contact between the parties, intentional or otherwise, will be considered a breach of court protocol.
She exhaled slowly. This is not personal theater.
This is federal business. As she adjourned the session for the day, the gavel came down with a thud that echoed longer than expected.
One by one, the gallery cleared out. Reporters made no attempt to hide their glee. Notes scribbled.
Audio notes dictated. Blog posts already halfway written. Everyone had the same thought. This was no longer a trial. It was a saga. Diddy exited first, flanked tightly by his lawyers and federal officers. His face was a mask, unmoved, unreadable. But a single glance downward revealed clenched fists at his side. Shia left next. Slower. He stopped once to adjust his jacket collar. then looked straight at a security camera mounted on the ceiling, and smirked. Whether it was confidence, defiance, or something darker wasn't clear. But that look would soon join the pantheon of courtroom iconography. Back in Judge Hanley's chambers, her clerk whispered, "Do we separate them again next time?"
The judge didn't look up.
She simply said, "If they even breathe near each other again, I'm issuing remote testimony."
The battle lines had been drawn.
The courthouse had been transformed into a stage. And the world was watching, waiting for the next act. By the time Diddy and Shia LaBeouf left the Stanley Mosque courthouse for the day, the internet had already detonated. What started as whispers from courthouse insiders became a viral avalanche of speculation, opinion, and memes. The phrase "they almost fought in the hallway" hit trending status on Twitter before either man had reached their vehicle. By midnight, 3 hashtags were globally trending.
#Diddy vs Shia. #courthouse clash. #let them speak.
And while legal documents remained sealed, the court of public opinion was wide open and utterly ruthless. Within hours, a grainy artist's sketch of the glare was posted side by side with iconic sports face-offs, like Muhammad Ali staring down Sonny Liston. TikTok flooded with lip-sync reenactments. AI-generated simulations dramatized the hallway confrontation, one even using deepfake voices over dramatic music. But it wasn't just memes.
Hollywood took notice.
Rihanna, notoriously quiet on legal drama, tweeted a single emoji, sunglasses #. Within minutes, her fans interpreted it as subtle shade toward Diddy, referencing his signature sunglasses and infamous poker face.
Seth Rogen posted,
"I was in traffic for 2 hours and missed the Diddy Shia pay-per-view. Is there a replay link?" Zendaya, while on a press tour in London, was asked directly by a reporter about the altercation. She laughed uncomfortably and replied, "I'm just here to talk about my movie, but wow.
That was something." Podcasts raced to put out emergency episodes.
Call Her Daddy dropped a bonus 45-minute breakdown titled Diddy v. Shia, Toxic Men, Legal Mayhem and That Look. The Joe Rogan Experience began teasing a possible guest spot for one of the marshals who saw it all.
And then came the PR statements. Shia's team was first. Short. Vague. Calculated.
Mr. LaBeouf is committed to cooperating with the legal process and maintaining respect for the court's authority. He remains focused on the facts of his case and will not engage with speculative or misleading narratives currently circulating in the media. The emotional toll of public litigation is real, and Mr. LaBeouf asks for space to continue his work and healing.
The words emotional toll trended for 3 hours.
Diddy's team responded later.
The tone was firmer.
Mr. Combs categorically denies any misconduct during court proceedings. He maintains full respect for the legal process and regrets the unprofessional behavior displayed by other parties present. Mr. Combs has been subjected to ongoing public attacks with no basis in fact and will not engage further with distraction tactics designed to discredit his character. Critics pounced on the phrase "other parties," seeing it as a veiled dig at Shia.
The fallout didn't stop at public image.
Legal analysts appeared on every major news network to dissect the possible consequences. CNN's legal correspondent speculated that if another hallway incident occurred, the court might separate them entirely via Zoom testimony. MSNBC aired a segment titled "When Ego Enters the Courtroom," comparing the situation to previous high-profile conflicts, Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard, Britney's conservatorship hearings, even back to the O.J. Simpson trial. But unlike those, this case wasn't just a celebrity implosion, it was a collision between two very different personas. One, Diddy, was empire-minded, calculated, image-protective. The other, Shia, was raw, unfiltered, artistically unhinged.
And the public couldn't stop watching.
Even Netflix joined the party, tweeting a GIF of 2 gladiators facing off with the caption, "Who had Diddy versus Shia on their 2025 bingo card?" Meanwhile, in more serious circles, the conversation deepened. The New York Times published a think piece titled "Masculinity and Mayhem: What the Diddy-Shia Clash Says About Power in Hollywood." Rolling Stone released a podcast episode speculating that Shia's outburst was intentionally designed to expose deeper rot in the entertainment industry.
And somewhere between all the noise, another headline quietly emerged.
A high-level studio executive leaked an internal memo suggesting a documentary was already being quietly developed. Working title: In the Hallway, When Courts Become Combat Zones. No one confirmed it, but speculation took hold. Netflix?
Hulu? Max? Someone was going to capitalize. It was inevitable.
Meanwhile, back in the city, smaller repercussions were unfolding. Brand partnerships for both men were reportedly under review. A cologne deal Diddy had been negotiating for a European launch went dark. A small indie director who had cast Shia in a passion project announced he was taking a creative pause.
Even their inner circles were shaken.
Sources close to Diddy said he was furious that the hallway footage might exist and had ordered his legal team to bury it or sue. One of Shia's friends told Page Six, he feels like he exposed something.
He's not ashamed.
If anything, he thinks people are finally seeing who the real villain is.
But opinions were split.
Some applauded Shia for confronting a culture of silence. Others accused him of emotional instability and theatrical manipulation.
Some called Diddy a composed professional.
Others labeled him controlling, cryptic, and manipulative behind closed doors. It didn't matter who was winning.
What mattered was that the story had exploded far beyond the courtroom. It was cultural.
And as the fallout continued to ripple across Hollywood, one thing was certain. This wasn't just a viral moment.
It was the beginning of something bigger. A reckoning?
A revenge tale?
A documentary in the making?
No one could say.
But everyone knew it wasn't over. Because court was still in session.
And security measures had just been rewritten. The Stanley Mosk Courthouse hadn't seen a transformation this swift in over a decade. Overnight, the building's entire operational protocol was rewritten, not because of a threat from outside, but because of what had occurred within.
Courtrooms are built for order, for rules, for restraint.
But after the Diddy and Shia incident, those pillars cracked. The following morning, the courthouse resembled a federal security facility. 2 new metal detectors were installed at both public entrances. Visitors passed through full-body scanners previously reserved only for high-risk criminal trials. Tactical units patrolled the perimeter, clad in dark blue uniforms with chest-mounted radios murmuring low-frequency updates every few seconds. Signs were posted on every wall in bold, red lettering. This is a modified security zone. All cell phones, recording devices, and unauthorized communication strictly prohibited. Court employees muttered that it felt more like a celebrity summit in a war zone than a legal institution.
Some joked about installing velvet ropes and red carpets outside.
But behind the gallows humor was a real concern. If 2 of Hollywood's most recognizable figures could trigger such chaos, what else could unfold when the cameras were really watching? Judge Hanley had acted swiftly and without compromise. First, both Diddy and Shia were placed under isolated court entry orders. This meant they would be brought in through different underground access points, escorted by separate federal marshal teams.
No more surprise encounters in hallways. No shared waiting areas. No proximity.
Second, court schedules were officially segregated. Shia would appear in the morning sessions, Diddy in the afternoon. That detail was leaked to the press within hours, and promptly misused by fans and protesters who now knew exactly when to show up. Third, for all future appearances, the court would implement remote monitoring options. That meant both men could be required to testify by live video feed if tensions or logistics made in-person sessions too risky. Judge Hanley warned both legal teams that she would not tolerate another breach of decorum, and that virtual isolation would be mandatory if even a whisper of confrontation returned. And yet, despite every new security measure, despite all the planning, the spotlight only grew brighter. That same day, a new rumor emerged. The U.S. Marshals Service had been approached by federal investigators requesting access to security footage from the infamous hallway incident. Not for public release, but to determine whether the confrontation rose to the level of criminal intimidation.
It wasn't just a courthouse drama anymore.
It had become a federal curiosity. Both legal teams released synchronized statements denying any criminal behavior. There was no assault, no obstruction, no threat issued, Diddy's rep stated. The moment was regrettable but did not violate federal law, Shia's rep echoed. But behind the scenes, tensions deepened. A sealed motion, never publicly confirmed but heavily speculated, was filed requesting a gag order on both parties. The motion alleged that media leaks had been strategically encouraged by one or both sides to manipulate public sentiment. The judge granted it. From that moment forward, neither Diddy nor Shia, nor their legal teams, were allowed to speak publicly about the case.
No statements. No interviews. No Instagram live rants.
Violators would face immediate contempt charges. This silence, ironically, only amplified the noise. Social media dubbed it the mute order. TikTok creators parodied it with skits of Shia and Diddy communicating only through facial expressions and courtroom sketches. Reddit threads exploded with conspiracy theories. Netflix already bought the documentary rights. There's definitely security cam footage, but they're saving it for court. This whole thing was a PR move. Watch, they'll announce a collab film next year.
Shia recorded it.
He's holding it like a hostage. While none of this was confirmed, the silence from both camps only fed the speculation machine. Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, something else was quietly developing. Sources close to the judiciary began whispering that the entire episode might prompt a formal review of how celebrity cases are handled in public courts. Judge Hanley reportedly consulted with state-level court administrators about setting guidelines for volatile high-profile proceedings. Talk of special protocols for future celebrity hearings began to circulate: controlled access, camera restrictions, behavioral clauses written into bail terms.
But the public wasn't paying attention to policy. They were still watching the two men at the heart of it all.
And while neither Diddy nor Shia spoke directly, their silence spoke volumes.
Diddy, spotted in New York days later, appeared calm but withdrawn. No smile. No public engagements. No music promos.
Just an Instagram story posted and deleted within 10 minutes, a black screen with the words, "You play with fire." Shia, on the other hand, was seen walking barefoot through Venice Beach, headphones in, talking to no one.
A fan captured the moment on their phone. No interaction. No quote.
But Shia looked straight at the camera for a full 2 seconds, expression unreadable, then turned and walked away. And finally, as the next hearing approached, the ultimate twist surfaced. Anonymous insiders claimed a documentary was in early development.
Not from Netflix. Not from Hulu.
From a private production company owned by a third party who had been present during the incident.
No one knew who. Some guessed a courthouse aide.
Others whispered it was a legal clerk with connections to streaming execs. Either way, Hollywood was circling the fire like vultures. What started as a courthouse schedule mix-up had evolved into the most explosive celebrity legal saga in years. And as Diddy and Shia prepared to return, this time through shielded corridors and under stricter watch, the world waited to see. Would there be peace? Or another explosion? Because the courtroom, once built for justice, had become a battlefield. And this wasn't over. Not by a long shot.